the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, two horrific ghost train wrecks in Kansas produce surge of baby births from out of nowhere in Topeka Hospital Maternity Ward. Agents of change versus agents of debit cards. Plus, we continue the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. This time we have an interview with Tim Akers, author of Night Watch, a contemporary fantasy novel that's a whole lot of fun. It's about a guy who goes to a Renaissance fair to get his SCA battle on, but finds himself confronted with a very real dragon. And there he is in a night suit, ready to fight. And from there, we find out about a secret organization that needs fellows like him with the ancient skills to hunt ancient beasts. It's good stuff. And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Now here's the news. There is indeed a November ebook sale from Baen eBooks. It's the Baen eBooks Leap into Liaden sale. Of course, we're talking about Sharon Lee and Steve Miller's wonderful Liaden Universe series. Get $2 off on Accepting the Lance, which is regularly $6.99. It's going to be $4.99 all through November, plus $1 off on all Baen Liaden Universe series ebooks, every one of them, available wherever Baen ebooks are sold. The sale runs until the end of November. So stock up on Liaden Universe ebooks, especially that Accepting the Lance special, $2 off, and get ready for Trader's Leap, the new Liaden Universe novel, debuting in December 2020. Hey, the blustery November winds have ushered in some great new Baen hardcovers and trade paperbacks at booksellers everywhere. First, there's 1637, No Peace Beyond the Line by Eric Flint and Charles E. Gannon. It's 1637 in the Caribbean. Commander Eddie Cantrell and his ally and friend, Admiral Martin Tromp, start the year with some nasty surprises for Imperial Spain, which is determined to possess the new black gold of the Americas. Now the battle for the New World has begun in this great alternate history series, and it is a fight to the finish. Also out in November is Serpent Daughter by D.J. Butler. Sarah Calhoun has taken the Serpent throne, but she may be dying. Forces are allied against her from without as well as from within at Cahokia. To survive, Sarah must enact the ancient rite that will propel her beyond mortality itself and lend her strength to fight. Finally, at booksellers in November is Agent of the Imperium by Mark Miller. This is big science fiction. Jonathan Bland is a decider. In the service of the Empire, he has killed more people than anyone in the history of humanity. But now he has to save 100 times as many by coming back and being reinstantiated as an agent of the Imperium. 1637, No Peace Beyond the Line by Eric Flint and Charles E. Gannon. Serpent Daughter by D.J. Butler and Agent of the Imperium by Mark Miller are now available at booksellers everywhere. Give thanks in November and get some good reading. Hey, I want to welcome Tim Akers to the podcast. How's it going, Tim?
Pretty well, sir. How are you?
Pretty good here in Baenland. Tim Akers grew up in rural North Carolina, the last in a long line of Scottish bankers, newspaper editors, and tourist-trap barons. He moved to Chicago to pursue his passion for apocalyptic winters, tornadic summers, and traffic. He stayed for the hot dogs. So
hot dogs are good.
Yeah, that's one of the selling points. Well, it's the hog capital of the world, I understand.
Yeah, yeah. According to some poems, yeah.
According to some poets.
It's funny, actually, like everyone talks about Chicago pizza, which I like just fine, but I'm really more of a Chicago hot dog guy. Like, whenever we travel somewhere else and come home, our first meal is always Portillo's, which is pretty much the most Chicago thing you can possibly eat. Chicago sausage.
And you grew up in North Carolina.
Yeah, I grew up in Western North Carolina, small town near Asheville, and came to Chicago for college. Didn't really intend to stay, especially after my first winter, but got married, bought a house, developed inertia, and sort of have kept kind of kicking around the idea of getting out of here, but it's just never happened. So, and it's been good being here. I've been able to, the college I went to has a fantasy writing group for students, and I've been able to sort of mentor that group and provide them a business perspective that I think a lot of young aspirational writers need. It's too easy to be like rah rah ree, write anything, I can do anything, and they really kind of need a little bit of like, here's how publishing works. Here's how to actually plot a novel. I often joke, I have an English degree, but I had to unlearn everything I learned in college to be able to write a book that someone would want to read. And so I try to bring that into it as best I can.
That's cool. And you told me the name of it was the Winklings.
Yeah, the Winklings.
Sort of a play
right.
on the Inklings of.
Yeah, the college is Wheaton College, and they have an archive on site called the Wade Center, the Marion C. Wade Center, that has a lot of Tolkien's archival materials. It has the desk where The Hobbit was written. It has the original wardrobe from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, literally like the wardrobe that was in Jack's house. And so there's a lot of like Tolkien fandom on site. And yeah, the group is called the Winklings, the Wheaton Inklings.
Yeah. Well, that's super cool. And it must be a bit of inspiration seeping over to you magically, perhaps.
Yeah. It's why I went to this college. I didn't really, take advantage of it while I was there, but it's how I ended up in Chicago.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can talk about it when we talk about the book. Maybe it characterized and created you. From maybe Tolkien's
my mythic domain.
I mean, C.S. Lewis's wardrobe made you into the guy that wrote this book, which is Night Watch by Tim Akers. There's 2 or 3 of them, yes, which is now at booksellers everywhere. It's a cool book. We sort of, on the back, our headline is Men in Black at the Ren Fair. You want to explain what that means and why it's so telling a description of the book?
Sure. Well, when you write a book, one of the things you have to figure out how to do is how to explain the book to people who have at least a passing interest. And so the Men in Black at the Ren Fair was one of the original pitch ideas that I sort of came up with as I was developing the book. Basic idea is that there is a mythic world that's overlaid on top of our world. And the various monsters, dragons, trolls, demons, and stuff, reality bends itself to prevent mundane humanity from being driven insane or bothered by these mythic creatures. And so you have, for example, a dragon, but rather than being a dragon in the real world, he ends up as a suburban tax attorney with a girlfriend in Canada. Who does too much CrossFit, is just frankly kind of an asshole. And that's how reality adjusts itself. And people are able to interact with that mythic world by becoming sort of their own mythic identity. There's a lot of gaming stuff in this. There's a lot of Ren Fair, a lot of SCA in it. I don't know.
I mean, it's in a way, there's a certain class or sort of person who is able to cross that boundary, and or whether they want to or not, they're not necessarily trying to do it. And in a way, like I think when we were talking about this at one point, it's like Charles Williams from the Inklings, his idea of like platonic forms that come into the world and start doing stuff.
Yeah.
And it's really like all of myth. You've got a huge universe that you've sort of conceived here.
Yeah, literally any mythology that exists could potentially exist in the world of Night Watch. This book focuses on sort of fantasy mythology, but there are references to, steampunk mythology, diesel punk mythology. I don't know so much about like, do we do the science fiction thing too? Do we have cyberpunk? So anything slash punk could potentially exist in the Night Watch world. But Night Watch focuses on the fantasy ideals, the fantasy tropes, which is how John ends up going in via, he's there on the cover. He ends up going in via Renaissance Fair in the middle.
You talk about that like you've had experience
a little bit
at such places.
yeah, a little. There in college, there was no SCA near me, no Society for Creative Anachronism near me. So a bunch of friends and I basically did our own thing. There were probably 40 of us, and we formed our own little noble houses, and we would dress up and do feasts, and we had assassination games and noble intrigue, and then we'd take PVC and duct tape and pipe insulation and make swords and just beat the living crap out of each other in a tournament style thing, and then we would just get together in the theater and just get 30 of us on a side and just wreck each other. That was a lot of fun. Those are good days. My girlfriend at the time, now my wife, was heavily involved in this stuff, and going to the local Renaissance Fair, which is up in Wisconsin, outside Chicago. Now, going up to that once a year was kind of a pilgrimage for this group. We would get all dressed up and drive up there. And part of the fun of it was like stopping at the gas station about halfway up in rural Wisconsin and freaking out the mundanes. That was always a good time.
There's there's a lot of that sort of culture, and there's a lot of gaming sort of feel to the book. Maybe just sort of describe the milieu before we talk about the characters of what's going on. Our main character's name is John Rast.
Right.
How does he? I don't know. Maybe start talking about the very beginning, and he encounters this dragon you've mentioned, Krachek, who's also a tax accountant. And since it happens in the first chapter, it's not really a spoiler.
Sure.
Set up what happens and how. Yeah. Maybe read your first sentence.
Yeah, sure. So
great.
The first sentence, the absolute first sentence, which is very early on in you don't always write the first sentence first, but in this case I did. I killed my first dragon with a blunt sword and the engine block of a 1977 Volvo station wagon. It was my mom's car. I don't think she'll ever forgive me, but in my defense, that dragon was a real asshole. So John goes to the local Ren Fair, and he's doing the sword fighting thing. He's there with some friends. He's home from college. His life is kind of falling apart. And John's the kind of guy who feels like he was born in the wrong century. He feels like he should have been born, in the noble ages of knights and dragons and damsels being distressed and doing of dare and all that. So he goes to the Ren Fair on the weekend with his friends, and he's doing the sword fighting competition thing. And he ends up fighting this guy named Krachek, who, as I've mentioned, is a tax attorney, apparently, a CrossFit guy who takes on the persona of Krachek the Destroyer on the weekends, and just goes around.
Not very chivalrous himself.
No, super not chivalrous. The kind of guy who cheats whenever he can, and just kind of a jerk about the entire process. And he's fighting Krachek, and about halfway through the fight, Krachek turns into a dragon and realizes that his cover is blown, and so Krachek is displeased and starts killing people, and John has to deal with it. And he deals with it by driving his mom's Volvo into Krachek's face. And that sets off a whole chain of events that ends up with John joining this organization called Night Watch, which secretly exists to protect the mundane world from the mythic world.
And John is he's out of it at the. I mean, he drives his Viking weapon, the Volvo, into which does play into later in the book. The fact that it is a Volvo is and he wakes up in this place called Mundane Actual. What is this? What's going on?
Right.
What's the pitch they make to him?
Yeah, I try to explain that the world is not the world that he thinks it is. The thing about Mundane Actual, in order to impact these mythic creatures, you have to exist in medieval times, essentially. My idea was basically, what if living that Ren Fair life actually made you able to live in this fantasy world? People who, this is not MHI. You can't just walk up to a dragon and shoot him because a bullet will have no impact on him because it's not a modern thing. He's not a modern thing. You have to have a sword to fight a dragon. And not only that, the sword has to be carried by somebody who is in touch with their mythic identity and is not corrupted by the modern world. So you have to, eschew all of the modern convenience. You have to not drive a car. You can't have a cell phone. You have to eat period food and dress in period clothes. And, that enables you to interact with the mythic world in a way that the rest of the world can't. Mundane Actual as a place is essentially an isolation chamber for these elites, for these mythics. It's a place where, because once you are in the real world fighting these things, you have to then sort of decompress. It's like going to a very deep pressure. You have to very slowly build your way back up. And Mundane Actual exists to assist that process, so that after they are at the Ren Fair fighting the dragon, they're able to recharge, but they have to do it by very slowly decorrupting themselves and descending through MA to get back to their mythic identity, basically.
And it's it's kind of like a secret organization place too, like a volcano secret headquarters kind of place.
Yeah, it's under a lake. It's actually in an old missile silo. I don't know if they have these in the Southeast, but out here in the Midwest, we have old Nike missile sites. One of the offices that I worked in was built on top of an ICBM silo. And if you knew the right person, which I did not, it's one of those sort of urban legend things, but there was, a silo underneath the office complex. And it was possible, if you knew the right people, to get down there and do a little tour, but you had to go in groups because there was no cell service down there. And if the door closed and no one knew you were there, there was literally no way for anyone to find out that you were there. You were gone. So it's built in one of those. And those go very deeply into the earth. So it's under a lake in the Midwest somewhere.
Yeah. And there's some creepy things down there. There's some leftovers from other mythos. The janitors, for instance, your feral janitors are great.
Yeah, the feral janitors, they're left over from Lovecraft. And they're just creepy, man. They're how do you describe these guys? They are, they're a host organism that exists as an octopus that comes out of their hand, right? And they're just kind of insane. They say inappropriate things, like they try to wash you by rubbing the octopus gently over your head and excreting certain chemicals to make the process pleasant for you and stuff. Yeah, they're jerks.
John did not want a bath from the.
John wanted nothing to do with that. Yeah.
So he's cleaned and at the Ren Fair were these other people. One of them was this guy Clarence, who was wounded, who was a nightlight figure, who had been sent to deal with Krychek, right?
Right. Yeah. Night Watch has the ability to detect anomalies in the real world. And so they know something's happening at this Renaissance fair, but they don't know what it is. And so when Krychek manifests in his dragonly gloriousness, they're there to step in. So John immediately, he's saved from certain doom by this rogue character she's bouncing around the dragon, and a knight and a mage. And the healer didn't show up for some reason, but everyone else is there. And he's going to run away, but then he realizes that things are not going well for the heroes. That's when he turns around and heads back. So, and does his thing with the Volvo. But yeah, Clarence is the knight, and there's Timbo, who's the mage, and Bethany the rogue, and that's everybody in the original thing. There's also
these sound like adventure gaming characters, and that is deliberate, and because why? Because the adventure gaming partakes of this mythos world as well, or
yeah, it's a way for people to interact with the fantastic world that they dream about. Not all of the characters are necessarily gamers, but a couple of them are, or were prior to joining Night Watch, and John is one of them. And basically, this book in a lot of ways is all of the stuff that I love. It's Renaissance Fair stuff. It's SCA and HEMA fighting. It's D&D. It's World of Warcraft. It's PG Wodehouse a little bit. And it's all sort of mashed together into a hero adventure story.
There's a lot of cool quips and comebacks that one might, it's a little meta, but not really meant to be a humorous book. It's an adventure, contemporary fantasy with humor in it, I would say.
Yeah, it's an adventure story that's funny as opposed to a funny story that happens to be an adventure.
There's some great stuff in there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when everyone else's dad was reading them, like Winnie the Pooh or whatever it is that dads read kids, my dad was reading me P.G. Wodehouse from a very young age. And so I grew up on Monty Python and Blackadder to an almost dangerous extent. So yeah, that kind of witty banter is my part and parcel.
So John meets this woman named Esther, who runs the place. What's her last name?
Esther McRae.
And and the meeting of them is pretty cool because she is trying to sort of, it has a Alice in Wonderland quality in that she's trying to figure out what mythos he might be part of. Why was he able to do this? What's going on there?
Yeah, well, part of it is, like I said, these mythic creatures can't be impacted or can't be affected by modern materials. And so the fact that he was able to drive his car through this guy's head, through this dragon's head, and kill it shouldn't happen. And so Esther spends all this time trying to figure out if it's a magical car or if John is somehow made some kind of contract with the genie, or maybe he was involved in a ritual with Presbyterians or something, and he's trying to figure out she's trying to figure out how this was possible. And the entire time John's like, no, the thing that isn't possible is this freaking dragon in a soccer field. What are you talking about? Where'd the car come from? The car came from, it's a Volvo, it's from a used car lot. What's wrong with you? And so that sort of transitioned into the unreal world, and the resistance of people like Esther saying, this is impossible. This shouldn't be a thing that's real. All while trying to explain that, dragons are real, genies are real, werewolves are not real. She makes a big point of that, and there's a reason for that. But that sort of blows his mind.
And Mundane Actual has some other aspects as well that are cool. There's you mentioned that they have the ability to detect anomalies, and they've sort of been reconstituted after World War II, right? There's
right, yeah. Esther was originally part of a Night Watch-like team in World War II. And the device that they use to detect anomalies is called the anomaly actuator. And it is the product of a Manhattan Project style or sized project during World War II that was used they were trying to affect the unreal world directly. They were trying to weaponize it essentially. And that didn't work out. And basically, Esther bought the thing off of surplus or stole it or something. So her history is a little unclear. She doesn't appear like she's old enough to be a World War II vet. She looks like she's in her mid-40s, but doesn't talk a lot about her past or where she's from or anything. But Some of that stuff sort of comes out later on.
He has branded the place, which was cool. People
Yeah.
have Night Watch patches.
Yeah. In the 80s, she got big into brand identity and logo management. And she came up with like a team song and stuff. Everyone's like, don't mention the song. We don't want to have to sing this song, please. But yeah, she got big into that kind of thing. And very early on, John, like, Night Watch is a dumb name. Every time you say Night Watch to somebody, you have to explain that it starts with a K. You know, it's Night Watch with a K at the beginning. And she's like, don't make fun of the name. I spent a lot of money on consultants trying to figure out, you know, a really good name for this thing. So yeah, she's on board going forward in the perfectly 80s kind of way. But
so let's talk about some of the other characters as well. So the reason John is sort of in touch with this mythic world is because he's just been in college and he's sort of disconnected from his life. He's come back, he's a senior, and he's been hanging out with some of his high school friends like Chessa and Eric. Who are they?
Yeah. So John's life has kind of fallen apart, right? He grew up in this kind of small town in the middle of nowhere, and went away to college and left his girlfriend, Chessa, and left his friend behind, Eric. And he got to college and then things kind of fell apart and he came home and he's sort of disconnected from the world, but things kind of start up again. So Chessa's his ex-girlfriend. Chessa has always wanted to be an elven princess, and she spends more money on her annual cosplay for her elven princess costume than, you know, most brides spend on their wedding gowns. And she goes to the Ren Fair and does the archery competition, and that kind of aspirational dream fulfillment is the only thing that really she and John had in common. Otherwise, you know, John's kind of an idiot and she's very, you know, on task kind of person. And so they broke up, but now he's back in town and they're kind of in the same social circles, so they keep ending up in the same places and they end up going to the Ren Fair together. And I don't know, I'm a big fan of the awkward conversation that sort of like books have, you know, tension and adventure and, you know, danger and all the various things that cause tension in a story. I like some of my tension to come from awkwardness, just plumb straight. You know, this is people I don't want to be around and we have to be talking about weather and stuff. So, but
John's got that kind of Tobey Maguire, you know, teenage character or young man character kind of feel to him.
Yeah, which, and all of that goes back to Bertie Wooster. Like he's the same kind of like, sort of disconnected youth, not really sure what he's going to do with himself, just trying to avoid the responsibility of the real world, and ends up, you know, the responsibility of the real world ends up being would have been a lot easier than what he actually ends up with, which is fighting dragons. You know, that's a lot more complicated process there, buddy, than, you know, filling out spreadsheets. But
and Chessa's aware of this as well, and she's brought to Mundane Actual, and she's all in.
Oh yeah, no, she's from minute one. Like as soon as Esther's like, you know, you could become the elven princess you always wanted to be, she signs on the dotted line like immediately. Yes. Whereas John is still like, I have a business plan, I have a 401k, and, you know, I got things that I want to do with my life other than whatever this nonsense is. You people are all crazy. And so sort of she's the one who's just like, yes, I'm there, I'm on board. And, you know, she gets her magical powers almost immediately. Her eyes begin to glow, and she very much becomes this elven warrior princess that she's always wanted to be very, very quickly. Takes to it like a fish in water. Whereas John, it's much more of a process for John. Like he thinks he knows what he wants to be, and then discovers that's not what he's capable of, and ends up, you know, going through this process of, I was this and now I'm this, and trying to figure things out.
So what about Eric, his best buddy because Eric plays a part in the story?
Yeah, Eric is a fantasy writer in the way that Thunderstorm is a bath, right? This is an opportunity for me to make fun of myself and my chosen career that provides me a living. He's a guy who writes too many adjectives in his stories, and his books are pretty much just maps, and you know, the plot is just moving around on the map and stuff, which is where, you know, some writers have to start. We can joke that maybe that's kind of what Tolkien did in a lot of cases. But yeah,
many a fantasy writer has started.
Oh yeah. Oh no, I've got my share of Macs. Believe me, they're all here. But yeah, that's sort of who Eric is, and he's a little he's a little disconnected from the Ren Fair thing. Like, he goes to the Ren Fair because it's an opportunity to drink publicly. Like, he's that guy. He goes in a bard's uniform and stuff, but he doesn't really do the traditional Ren Fair thing. He's just there for the drinking in a field kind of thing, which, you know, that's not mock drinking in a field. I've done my share of drinking in fields. Grew up in the South, so.
Yeah. So one of the things that is fun in the book is, and I don't think it's giving anything away, is there is a point where there's a doppelganger of Eric, and John is able to tell them apart because the doppelganger doesn't well, you explain it.
Yeah, he just says what he means. He doesn't apply a bunch of adjectives to it. He just says, yes, the sky here is quite blue, as opposed to the sky, cerulean and slate, covered from horizon to horizon in stars innumerable, you know, that kind of thing, which is a lot of Eric's dialogue, is something along those lines. So yeah, he's like, that's not Eric. Who is this? You know, this creature that has invaded my friend's body. This is not Eric at all. Yeah, so that's kind of, you know, one of the tells.
So the other thing about Mundane Actual is there's these portals to places where the characters who are part of Night Watch and other teams recharge. What are these personal domains? Like Clarence has one where he really has to go after he gets beat up by Kraychek.
Right. Yeah. So the idea, when you're becoming your mythic self, right, you have to essentially recharge your batteries after you've been exposed to the real world, because it kind of corrupts you, and so you have to decontaminate, and you do that by achieving your mythic ideal. So you have some domain that you go to recharge, and that gives you your powers. So Clarence is a knight, and when you first meet Clarence, well, actually, the second time you see Clarence, he's been beaten up, and he's in the hospital, and they're concerned that he might never fight again, but he's probably going to survive, and so he needs John needs to sort of take over for him. And Clarence is like, well, let's go to my domain and I'll train him. And so you meet Clarence's buddy is this dragon named Kyle. All of the dragons have K names, I just realized. I didn't even focus on that. Anyway, so there's Kyle, the dragon. And in the real world, Kyle is kind of this big cartoony, goofy puppy dog like character. But once you transition into Clarence's domain, Kyle becomes this sort of ravaging dragon, sort of, you know, the prime dragon. He breathes fire and he flies through the night sky, and he chases Clarence back to his castle. So Clarence has his castle, and basically when he's in his domain, he trains, he has feasts at his castle, and he fights a dragon. That's his identity. He is identified by, or he is defined by this conflict with the dragon. So that's the kind of knight he is. He's the kind of knight who fights dragons, and that's his domain. Whereas later on, John, when he goes to try to figure out what his domain is, it's basically a cabin in the woods that's surrounded by this nightmarish forest that it's always nighttime, and there are all these bizarre creatures, and he figures out that his thing is he has to be brave in the face of overwhelming fear.
Because so, your domain is determined by who you are as a mythic being.
As a mythic character, yeah, right. Yeah, like the healer ends up going back and being in the presence of the divine. Because, I mean, we were talking about this earlier, but in the Old Testament, when you were in the presence of the divine, your face would glow. And there would be a period of time afterward when your face would glow and people would know that you are that you had been in the presence of divinity. And the cleric in this series, Saint Matthew, has the same thing going on. He goes into his domain, and when he comes out, his face is glowing. And angels in this world are essentially cancerous, right? Because they're this microwave oven that's just pumping out divinity all the time. And so when there are angels in the real world, they have to wear kind of like a deep sea diving uniform, because otherwise they'd be infecting everyone around them with a certain malignant divinity. And so
your body can't handle the truth.
You can't handle the truth. Quite literally. Well, we talked with Lewis, talked about that a lot. When he talked about there being angels in the real world, you think that would be a great thing until you actually experience something that is so good that it sort of dissettles the world around it. From the Space Trilogy, he talks, whenever an angel appears in the Space Trilogy, it's almost a nightmarish experience because it's so outside of our understanding of good and evil. It's just pure good, that it's a frightening thing to be around. So anyway, but yeah, it sort of powers your, going into these domains powers your mythic identity. And the domain itself is formed by your mythic identity. You have to go through kind of a hero's journey to get there and to create the domain.
So you talk about, you were mentioning the healer who's Matthew. What about some of the other characters that John meets, such as Timbo?
Yeah, Timbo represents kind of an ancient power that predates Nightwatch by like centuries. And his domain is this place called Gravehome. It's basically the Veldt. And when he's there, he turns into this half man, half elephant giant creature. And so there's a lot of like, he is a mythology that exists outside. He is his own mythology, right? And he exists outside of sort of our understanding of mythos. But in Nightwatch, he's just the mage. He's the fireball guy. But he has no experience with the modern world. So sort of more recent inductees into Nightwatch will sometimes talk about missing coffee or blue jeans. And he has no like concept of I suppose we know what coffee is, but he has no concept of what those things are or how they function. And so that's sort of part of the tension between them is here's a car, he doesn't know what a car is. That's not a thing that he has any experience with. It's just this terrifying thing that runs in. So, but yeah.
But Matthew, he's from he misses his blue jeans.
He misses his blue jeans. Yeah, Matthew is he's a recent addition. I haven't gotten too much into Matthew's background and history, but I think he'd be kind of a fun guy. He's kind of a stoner dude. He's essentially the dude abides, but a saint, and he's kind of always a little bit like not panicking. It's okay, man. It's cool. Healer's here. Everything's fine, even when it's not. And he keeps not showing up when he's supposed to be there. In the original, when Kraychek the dragon shows up, it's a problem because the healer didn't show up. He was supposed to be there, but he forgot something back at home, and so he went back to get it. And so he doesn't show up until after all the bad things have happened.
So what happens when John goes back to because he has to go back to our reality for a while.
Right.
What's that like for him now that he knows all this exists and he's sort of becoming part of it?
Well, it's interesting because his initial thought was, this is great. I'm going to be a hero now. This is wonderful. But when he goes back to normal reality, he goes back to his parents' house. He realizes that the things that left him feeling disconnected in the real world are even more real now. He's sharply aware that not only does he no longer feel that he belongs here, he literally no longer belongs here. And things that he took for granted, basic technology, stops working for him. He pulls out his cell phone and it's turned into a tarot deck. He tries to start his car and it just doesn't function. He rides a bicycle and it falls apart around him. He tries to call Eric because Eric disappears after the Kraychek thing. And he tries to get a hold of Kraychek and uses the phone, and he gets a hold of something, but it's not Eric. It's some haunted voice that follows him around for a while. So it's, if anything, an even more isolating event. Like he expected to be able to go home and be like, I'm a hero now, but in actuality, it's things are just
yeah. Because, and it's he has to, the rules are now that he is part of this mythical world that's inside himself, and he has to do things that follow those rules.
Yeah.
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 It's really cool because he has to sort of think inside that box, right?
Right. He has to think inside that box. And not only that, he has to try to, like, that world begins to bleed into the world that he's existed in prior to that. Like, you know, there are serious consequences for his parents to have a knight living under their house, under their roof. You know, now he has to deal with Chessa and has to figure out where Eric is. And all the while, strange things keep happening to him that he thought he would be excited about. But when they actually start to happen, like when, you know, a tornado turns into a storm harpy that then chases you through your living room, not so great. Not the life you were expecting. And yet, here we are.
So we'll talk about a little bit about the bad things, the bad guy portion of things. What is he up against?
Well, it all goes back in part to that Volvo, right? Because that shouldn't have happened, and that sets into motion a number of other events. Someone is trying to get at Night Watch. Someone is trying to either corrupt Night Watch or take advantage of it. And it all started at this Ren Fair. And so it's kind of up to John to figure out, John and his friends to figure out like what happened. Eric goes missing. They have to go find him. They do eventually find him. Hopefully this isn't too much of a spoiler. They find him in a bookstore in a mall, which is how you know you're really in like a not real world, because that doesn't exist anymore. Not a thing. But so he's trying to figure out who it is that is trying to take over Night Watch, and it's this doppelganger keeps showing up and putting on his friends' faces and attacking them. The same doppelganger attacks Chessa and her domain. So the next time that Chessa and John are in the same place, Chessa tries to kill him because she thinks that he's the doppelganger. And so, you know, and of course they end up back at a Renaissance fair, a big one, statewide one. And it all sort of goes downhill from there.
Now you mentioned the cover before, and it's really pretty. This is a Tom Lockwood cover. I think it really makes the book.
It does, yeah. I was really happy with that cover. When I got it, as soon as the contract was done, Jem sent me the cover over, and I was like, winning. It's a great cover. I've followed Todd since one of my early books was with Pyre, and he did some work with Lou Anders there, and I saw those covers and was like, oh yeah, that's making it. You know, that's the cover that I want, and I got it. Yay!
Yeah. Well, it's a really cool feeling world. It's very different from just a monster hunting sort of world, in that the characters are constrained by this mythos in a way that, you know, they can't just blow things away with nuclear weapons or whatever the heck, unless they somehow mythologize them, right?
Fireball is still a thing.
Fireball's still a thing.
Yeah.
So what?
But
how do you see the world? You were talking to me earlier about the way the world sort of folds out, and there's more to it. What?
Yeah, there's a brief mention of this, but so Night Watch is specifically the fantasy version of it. But there are teams that deal with all the various genres, if I can use a publishing term. So that there's a steampunk team and a science fiction team and all this stuff. But John is constrained to the one version of it, just the fantasy version. and that has so many consequences because you kind of have to, stop eating Twinkies and, stop using your phone and stuff. So it really is. There's a lot to the world that I've kind of got in my head. There's a World War II version of it that Esther deals with, but so much of it is it exists in potentiality, but doesn't actually. There aren't any like stories written in those places yet. There could be.
There might be. So what are you working on? What's going on?
Right. So Night Watch was not the book that I was supposed to be writing when I wrote Night Watch. I had finished a trilogy, and my agent and I got together and agreed that I should do something in brand. So I was working on this book called Wraithbound. And I don't know, when you get to the end of a fantasy trilogy that has like 30 characters in it, you kind of want to break. And so the Wraithbound pitch was, I want there to be one guy. But he has to have someone to talk to, so let's have a dead person bound to his soul. Cool, Wraithbound, that's the book. And it's kind of built out from there, but I'm like 6 drafts into that. But Night Watch sort of fell into my head one morning, and I wrote it without telling Joshua, my long-suffering agent, about it at all, and sort of submitted it. It was like, here's a book, enjoy. Which he did, and it has worked out. So Wraithbound is a thing that's still in drafts. I'm already contracted for a sequel to Night Watch, which is tentatively called Valhellions, and that's outlined and about a third written, probably. So I'm sort of switching back to that. I stopped writing everything while I was doing the promotion and stuff for Night Watch, but I'm kicking back into Valhellions after this.
Cool. Well, the book out at booksellers everywhere right now is Night Watch by Tim Akers. Tim, thank you so much for talking with us about this really, really cool blend, wonderful conception of a book.
Well, thank you, sir. Yeah, I'm very happy with it. Like I said, this is kind of my core book. It's a book that I wrote because I wanted to read it, and that's the only way I know how to write a book. And it's sort of, it's a fun adventure book. It's not, a diatribe on the nature of reality or anything. It's a book you're going to enjoy reading, which is kind of a shocking
entertainment. Yeah. It's got some depth too. It's really cool. It's a great book.
Oh, yeah.
And thanks for talking to us, Tim.
Thank you, sir. Been a pleasure.
Here is another entry in David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Honor keeps her promise. The Solarian League. For hundreds of years they have borne the banner of human civilization, but the bureaucratic mandarins who rule today's League are corrupt and looking for scapegoats. They've decided the upstart Star Kingdom of Manticore must be annihilated. Uncompromising courage. Honor Harrington has worn the Star Kingdom's uniform for half a century. Very few know war the way Honor Harrington does. So far, hers has been a voice of caution. But now the Mandarins have committed atrocities such as the galaxy has not known in 1,000 years. They have finally killed too many of the people Honor Harrington loves. Uncompromising vengeance. Now Honor Harrington is coming for the Solarian League, and hell is riding in her wake. And now, David Weber's Uncompromising Honor.
System Defense HQ. City of Columbia, Beowulf System. Corey McAvoy watched the clock. 2 more minutes until Mycroft launched, he thought, and felt a distant sort of sympathy for the thousands of Sollies who were about to die. Still, he hadn't come looking to invade their star system, and his head jerked up as an alarm shrilled. He'd never heard that particular alarm, even in a training exercise, and his eyes snapped towards the master status board. What the? He froze, staring in disbelief at the readouts. Sir? Dunstan Myers began, then stopped and drew a deep breath. Sir, we just lost Mycroft. How? The single-word question sounded preposterously calm in McAvoy's own ears, and Dunstan Myers shook her head. I don't know, sir. We just lost the FTL feed from the master platforms. They were about— Excuse me, ma'am. Captain Chasnikov, one of Dunstan Meyer's assistants, said. What? The ops officer half-snapped. Ma'am, according to Skywatch, some of the Ghost Riders picked up grazer fire right on top of the platforms. Grazer fire? Dunstan Myers repeated. That deep inside the limit? That's what Skywatch says, ma'am, Chasnikov said, and McAvoy and Dunstan Myers looked at one another in shock. Then the CNO shook himself. Right this minute, how they did it matters a hell of a lot less than the fact that they did it, he snapped. Block ship impellers to full readiness now. They may adjust position on thrusters, but their wedges do not go active without my order. Yes, sir. Dunstan Myers nodded sharply, pointing at the comm, and Chasnikov started speaking urgently to Cassandra Defense. In the meantime, Cheryl, McAvoy went on, upload the targeting queue directly to the pods. Sir, that's going to take at least another 13 or 14 minutes. We'll have to start from scratch, Dunstan Myers pointed out. And without Mycroft, accuracy's going to be poor even for Apollo. It'll be a hell of a lot better than no accuracy at all, McAvoy grated. Yes, sir.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Uncompromising Honor by David Weber. And that's it for the podcast, thanks to Audible.com. And to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And a flagon of dragon wine and some dandelions for the unicorn, plus thanks and praise for Tim Akers, author of Night Watch. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.